Alright, YouTube, this isn't part of the occult series that I've made. I've already spoken about my feelings on extraterrestrials. I believe that, speaking in the purest mathematical terms, it's rather unthinkable that advanced life does not exist elsewhere, if not in this galaxy, at least somewhere else in this universe. I think that, personally, the universe is teeming with life, both intelligent and unintelligent, sophisticated and unsophisticated. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to narrow it to the 10 what I would consider likely possibilities as to why the general population doesn't experience extraterrestrial visitation on a regular basis. That is, while there's good reason to believe there's life out there, and while there is the possibility that they have interfered with man's development at some point or another, while that is the case, it is not known absolutely and concretely that there are extraterrestrials roving around in our star system. And here are the top 10 explanations other than they don't exist at all that I think adequately fit as to why that is. I would think that the first possibility is possibly the most likely. The first possibility is simply that our general region, our star system, our planet, and so forth, are exceptionally boring, exceptionally mundane, and there's nothing here specifically of any real value. That is, that we are essentially a backwater. And I'm not saying, and I'll go into at the end, sort of to the end of this, of the possibility that there may be several reasons why we don't experience visitation. I think the first possibility, though, is probably one of the most likely. Simply, there's nothing here. There's no reason for them to possibly come here, combined with that being perhaps they choose to leave us alone, and some of the reasons involve that exactly. But simply the idea that the Earth, if not necessarily all the bodies in the solar system, is mundane. That is, we considered 20 or 30 years ago Earth to be relatively unique because we hadn't really witnessed weather patterns and liquid water and some of the elements conducive to life. We hadn't really witnessed that elsewhere because of our own crude techniques. Now we know Earth is relatively normal in size and possibly in composition. We've got a next-door neighbor in Mars that appears to have been relatively similar to Earth, at least earlier in its development. So the idea that this solar system really just doesn't have anything of any real value to any extraterrestrial race, I think, is probably the most likely reason why, essentially, we're in the backwoods of the galaxy. We're not, the central hub of activity, or cosmically important, as some people seem to have believed in the past. We're really, essentially, a backwater. The second possibility is that we're too warlike. The second possibility would be, if an alien race has developed a multi-world system and the ability to traverse long distances, they must have a relatively cohesive and orderly society. They must have some sense of what we would at least term morality, if not necessarily an ideal of morality, at least a system that functions that way by proxy. Essentially, they would have to have a lot of teamwork in order to actually create and maintain such systems. As such, it would seem that a race that was willing to kill its own members would not have thrived in that manner. That is, that essentially the idea that any advanced races out there are much more likely to be benevolent to our eyes than they would be malevolent. Because otherwise they probably would have fallen into infighting over resources, and it would hold back their development in the same way that the human race has at times been held back in some ways. I mean, they would look at us, if this is their characteristic, they would look at us and say, this species is moderately intelligent, but they also spend a great deal of time butchering one another. They butcher other life forms and consume them on a regular basis, despite not necessarily having to do so. They could even take a look, if they're capable of monitoring this planet at a distance without being known, they could even monitor the media that we put out, see what we think of alien encounters in general, movie, every other alien movie involves the concept of blowing things up and destroying some alien homeworld, and they would say, my goodness, these are barbarians, essentially. They would say, they would look at us the way that, the Swiss would look at the North Koreans or something. But I guess that's not necessarily the most apt comparison, but I think you know what I mean. They would look at us and say, if they're killing one another, my goodness, what's going to happen if we show up? They're just going to fire a bunch of nuclear weapons at us. Ultimately, they wouldn't even be able to make a landing here without getting fired upon. And if they are pacifistic, they may choose not to defend themselves. They may actually feel threatened by the human race as a total. They realize as long as they stay away from us, we're no threat to them, so they leave us alone. So I think that's the second possibility. I think also weapons testing that happened on this planet and some of the broadcasts we put out are a pretty clear hallmark to any advanced alien life forms out there that we're not exactly open for intergalactic business. The third would be the idea, this goes sort of to the Sumerian legends. There are a lot of ancient legends that talk about people from the stars, so I might as well get into this one. The idea that we have been engineered or hybridized with space aliens. There are some questions left in the past of human evolution that leads me to believe this is at least possible. If that is the case, we may be to the galactic community, so to speak, as Australia was to the British Empire for its first few decades or whatever of incarnation. That is, essentially, we are an expat prison colony for hybridized alien life forms anyways, that have achieved what we would consider an advanced mode of intelligence. While being measured on an absolute scale, we are rudimentary, backwards, and uncultured. That is, that we are essentially the criminals of the galaxy, and this would be thus a prison world. And they don't really worry about... I don't worry about the idea that aliens would destroy mankind, because if they know that we're here, and they would have to if they're advanced enough, they would know that this planet's populated. If they felt threatened by us or wanted to take over this world, they already would have. And it likely would be conspicuous, and so I don't really worry about that. But they may see us not just as warlike, but also degenerated. Literally the way we would view some half-cultured mutant, like a revived Neanderthal or something like that. The fourth possibility is we could be an experiment of sorts. That is, that we may have been deliberately engineered, and the idea all along was to engineer a sentient race without actually giving it real culture, and then allow it to advance through the process of natural selection, or they may have re-engineered these same hominids that they may themselves have engineered to begin with, sort of around the, Ken fashion stone tools era, into sophisticated modern man. In which case they might keep themselves at a distance, specifically because we're to be observed. This is essentially, it's not a prison planet, it's not a barbarian planet, it's a zoo. That is, that the Earth may actually be like we would have a zoo, that they literally watch us and either are entertained by our antics and waiting until we inevitably wipe one another out and they don't really care. They see us as a form of entertainment, sort of how the Romans would see, animals killing each other in the Colosseum. Or they see us as an interesting experiment. They simply decided to experiment upon hominids in that manner, and then decided to leave them alone. And they may or may not even still be there. Maybe it was a short-term thing where they just wanted to see the sort of engineering that they could do, and that all of these, it's sort of the ancient aliens thing again, with all of these legends of the Chimera and all of these things. Maybe those are things that they engineered and they just did it sort of because they could. It was a form of entertainment or experimentation for experimentation's sake. The fifth possibility is perhaps they have a moral philosophy or a social philosophy that specifically precludes tampering with what they would see as a lesser race. That is, that while we have what we consider intelligence, they look at us essentially as less hairy apes. And that because of that fact, they don't want to interfere. They either see it as a form of self-determination because they recognize our marginal intelligence, or they see us as complete animals. Basically, we're basically just animals to them, and they have a thing, just an actual philosophical or moral thing, against the idea of interfering with our development. The sixth, I think, is probably the next most likely, other than number one being there's just nothing interesting here, and that's that our world may be actually inhospitable to them. We have an oxidizing atmosphere, a lot of water vapor, we're loaded down with viruses and bacteria, and it could be that this world developed life early on enough that very early on it was essentially filled with what to them would be a toxic shroud that simply renders our world uninhabitable to these same alien races. It could be that they're used to a more sterile world where the evolutionary system did not work in the same way. They may see viruses and bacteria as an existential threat to them. There may be the same worry that when NASA sent people to the moon, what happened when they came back? Did they immediately go back to their families and talk about all the cool rocks they saw? No. They stayed in a special hermetically sealed chamber for weeks because the worry was there that there may be viruses and bacteria out there that they could get on them, bring back to Earth, and cause worldwide plague. Well, they may have the same kind of standard techniques in play. If they came down, they probably would be wearing full body suits. Sort of the mech armor and stuff like that. It's not because they're worried about us attacking them so much as they're worried about getting infected by something that potentially would be infectious to them. They would then be worried about carrying it somewhere else, almost like an intergalactic plague ship that crashes on their homeworld full of corpses, and then pretty soon their homeworld is depopulated. For all we know, it may have already happened in the history of the galaxy. It could be that one of these races knows firsthand what it's like simply because it's actually happened before. We've got to consider the fact that any sophisticated race probably developed hundreds of thousands or millions of years earlier than we did. They may have already had time to actually experience that. It would be quite similar to the European colonists who went over to the New World. Well, yes, first and foremost, they killed off a lot of the Mesoamericans with their own diseases. They also got diseases they weren't used to from the Mesoamericans. I think people also forget that some of the earliest landings, even by Columbus himself, were utter failures because of things like malaria. I think people honestly forget that there was also that other side to the story, that actually the colonists were getting crippled just as much as the Mesoamericans in some of the areas that they landed. That's a inconvenient piece of history that people often forget. Both sides, they exchange that genetic material from world to world. I think that's probably a smart idea. If the aliens have that in mind, then it's probably a show of incredible intelligence that they're not willing to actually expose themselves to such a thing. The seventh idea is that they just don't want to cause chaos here. Essentially, they're benevolent enough to realize, and intelligent enough to realize the fact that if aliens were suddenly to come out of the sky and start intermixing with humans, especially modern humans, not so much ancient humans, it would cause chaos. In ancient times, it's possible that they could have visited man, and they simply would have been called gods or whatever. It may be that they did that, realized what happened, and realized that people were killing one another over their different interpretations of these same alien races, realized that it had caused a lot of chaos, repented of this action, and said, well, we're not going to do that again because these people are crazy, or we just don't want to see them wipe themselves out because, again, they have some sort of moral opposition to such a thing. The eighth possibility is they already have been here, and they specifically already met with, the sort of leadership of the world or whatever at some time in the past or present, and were told to please not interfere after probably a long, discussion over the issue. Specifically, if I was in a position of power in this world, and aliens came down and said, well, we want to intermix with your world, we want X, Y, and Z, and we'll give you X, Y, and Z, and we want to live here, or we want you to come visit us, or we want to give you this cool technology, or let's put a portal up so we can travel between our two worlds because you humans seem really cool. I would beg them not to do so, and I would beg them to leave. Because my understanding would be, though they may be benevolent, though there is a good intention there, though there may be an incredible increase in prosperity and health and happiness, it could also cause utter and absolute chaos as people who have an anthropocentric view of the spiritual world or of the biological world realize we're actually not all that, and their entire moral system begins to break down. It could cause war, it could cause riots and chaos. So it could be that they've already been here and were warned that human beings tend to see themselves essentially as the literal center of the universe, the only intelligent race, or if not, at least the only intelligent race that matters to them, and said, well, please go back in your ships and return to your world, because trust me, you probably don't want to be around us. And the ninth is similar. They may have already been here and they're already in control. That is, and this is sort of a conspiracy theory that's often echoed, is the possibility that at some point in the past, usually World War II is mentioned, or the Cold War. At some point in the past, aliens did come down, speak to the leaders, and were sort of invited to have benevolent control over various things. And there are various theories that follow this. One is that they were mostly benevolent, and they said, well, we're going to take control of this situation because otherwise you're going to wipe each other out. You can keep playing the Cold War game, but don't actually press the little red button. And then they sweeten the deal by giving a bit of technology to the US and Russia. That's one possibility. Another is that it's malevolent, that they're looking for humans as sex slaves or experiments or something like that, and so all these these disappearances you have and abductions are actually them doing experiments. It's not exactly clear. There's probably no way to actually verify that, because if either of these last two are true, the average person in the population doesn't know about it, and they may never know about it. Or it could be that we need to achieve some sort of social threshold of understanding about science and biology and philosophy and morality before we're able to know that without our own cultures breaking down. And the 10th is also possible. I don't think some people have thought of this. There's also the possibility that while this world may be someplace they want to visit, while it may have resources they want, while they may be interested in humankind, whatever they think of us, that they don't have the capability to actually get through interstellar space, reach Earth, return to where they were effectively. That is, that either you could look at this from an economic perspective. If there are resources here, are they capable of being here long enough to extract enough of them to turn some sort of profit, if they've even got a concept of profit? Or is it worth the amount of fuel that they would use if they're using fuel? Or is it worth their time, assuming they haven't developed what we would consider biological immortality? Or is it simply worth their effort when there may be other locations that are closer by where they can get the same resources, or they can encounter other sentient races that they would be willing to, sort of have a dialogue with? These are all possibilities. There are many reasons why, if there are intelligent life forms out there, as I believe there are, that we're not aware of their existence or only dimly. I think there was a report just today on the fact that there appear to be intelligently manufactured sort of radio signatures coming from various parts of this same galaxy directed towards Earth, or at least we can hear them here. And I think they point out 187.5 was the sort of width of the signal or something like that, or the duration. And they seem to be coming from different places and yet being roughly the same, so they're thinking it's probably an artificial signal. Of course, it could just be the result of a malfunctioning satellite, really, to tell the truth, already orbiting Earth. It would have been easier, by the way, to SETI and all these groups. It really would have been easier to monitor outer space if we didn't have so many satellites in the way, making their own weird noises, sending their own signals on a constant basis. And if the ionosphere wasn't constantly full of shortwave signals, and there are FM radio signals, AM radio signals, there's all sorts of industrial and mechanical and electrical noise going on here, it would have been a little bit easier. I think I know why they put them out in rural areas specifically, so they can avoid some of that noise trash, so sort of the audio garbage. But there are reasons why, if they are out there, as I believe, that they wouldn't be in active communication with Earth, or even if they are, if they could literally be parked right outside the upper atmosphere, and you wouldn't necessarily see them, but there would still be a reason why they're going unseen, why they choose not to be seen, why they choose not to be interacted with. All these sort of like alien anal probe tales and things like that, I think that's mostly the result of people on PCP who astonishingly often seem to talk about basically the same thing, or people who have taken too much DMT or are just stoned out of their gourd in general on some sort of hallucinogenic substance. However, there are reasons why our planet would not be approached openly, or wouldn't be approached at all. If this is a mundane area with no resources of value, or it's a completely inhospitable world to any other race that could possibly be out there of extraterrestrials, then there would be no reason that they would approach it. Even if they found us interesting, they wouldn't actually be able to interact with us to any great degree, because they wouldn't actually be able to be on our planet for an extended period of time. It could be that literally the fact that we have so much humidity and an oxidizing atmosphere and seismic activity and electromagnetism and electrical fields and all sorts of weird shit on our planet, the fact that we've turned our planet into an electrified ball of water vapor, essentially, could preclude them from actually getting anywhere near it safely. It could be that that interferes with whatever sensitive systems they use. They may be used to wandering around the cold dark of space, periodically parking next to stars to recharge their batteries, so to speak. Maybe they're just nomads. Maybe their homeworld's gone. Maybe they're not looking for anywhere to settle. They've gotten used to a nomadic life, and now they just sort of wander around like Star Trek mode, documenting things and trying desperately not to actually contact any foreign life forms because they don't know if they're warlike or not, and they're worried about getting, completely destroyed. And I would say that's a valid concern, I would assume, for alien life forms, when you consider the fact that our weapons technology appears to have far outstripped our philosophical growth, to the point where most people in this world are still operating on a fairly rudimentary, low intellectual level, where most of what they think about is really related to money and vicarious to that, sex and food and sort of these base desires. Their philosophical capabilities are minute. Their intellectual capacity is mediocre at best in many cases. And yet this same race of human beings that's largely composed of these rudimentary individuals possesses weapons capable of annihilating all of its own race off of its own singular homeworld, for no reason other than arguing over resources that could be obtained from other worlds, from asteroids or whatever. I think that any alien race observing this would find it rather strange. They would probably think of us as extremely violent mutants that are not to be approached under any circumstances. They might even look at something like our growth rate, say it's untenable, declare us to be a parasitic race of sorts on our own homeworld, presume that we're probably just doomed to wipe one another out anyway, and then maybe they're just waiting till we do that to take over the world anyway. Maybe it's got resources they want, but they realize they can wait for 1,000,000 years. They don't care. They look at humankind, they say they've been somewhat sophisticated for only about 1,000 of their sun years, and yet they're close to choking themselves out of existence. Well, I guess we can wait another decade of their time because it doesn't really matter. We're biologically immortal and cloaked and sitting behind the moon or something. That could be the case. Why would they approach the world and actually try to talk us out of it when maybe our own demise is the best thing that the galaxy ever had happen? Maybe they've got entire books on this strange race that calls themselves the humans, on this world they call the Earth, the third rock from their own star, and all that these humans do all day is fuck and eat other life forms that can feel pain and kill each other, essentially. And they live in these big ugly buildings that are full of diseases and parasites and rodents, and they're controlled by what they call their presidents and kings and things like that. They would find this, I'm sure, very strange. I find it strange, and I'm a human being, but they would find it even more strange. They're not used to such a thing, probably. Because if they were, they would have wiped themselves out, probably. They wouldn't be an advanced race. They probably would have cut themselves off in infancy as we many times have really come very close to doing, especially within the last century, especially since the development of atomic weapons. Mankind has been perilously close to the edge several times already. And it's inevitable that we will have a nuclear war. So they're probably just waiting for that so they can put the final chapter on the Book of Man and say, my goodness, well, there was a failed race if ever there was one, a failed experiment, a failed mutant, a failed criminal colony of Anunnaki hybrids or something like that. So yes, there are reasons they would not approach this world. I think people, in their anthropocentrism, they often have the tendency to base everything that they think about extraterrestrials around human norms. They assume that, well, it's like the prime numbers thing. They say, oh, well, any race is going to have a prime numbers, and they're going to understand this same set of mathematics. Not necessarily. That's not a prerequisite to being an advanced life form. The fact that we have that understanding of mathematics doesn't mean it's universal. The idea that they're going to flash prime numbers, I mean, this 187.5 thing might, in some alien numerical system, make a whole lot of sense and be what they consider a divine or especially important number. We may not see it that way because of our own system. Therein lies the problem. We're trying to apply human norms to non-human entities. It doesn't work that way. It's like extending our knowledge of morality to the animal world and then saying, bad dog, you just ate that rodent. Well, the dog doesn't know any better because it's not a human. But anyway, that's about the way it goes. So yes, I wouldn't expect, as long as we remain warmongering and single world and relatively philosophically backwards, I wouldn't look for aliens to come and save you from your troubles, because really humans have caused their own troubles that probably, at the very least, they would wait until we solve some of these problems that we have before they get anywhere near this planet. If for any purpose other than to control it, to keep us from destroying ourselves, to keep us sort of as feudal serfs. Yeah, but that's about all. Peace out.